AgCountry offers a wide range of internal growth. If you have a goal in mind and you put your mind to it, your successes can be endless.
There are so many jobs within this company that you can rotate into.
I like challenges. AgCountry gives me challenges.
Yeah, AgCountry is a great place to work. There's plenty of flexibility. You're never tied to your desk. There's a team here that is always there for you.
Yeah, grab your role and run with it. And always be aware of the opportunities because they're in front of you.
I am a succession and retirement consultant at AgCountry Farm Credit Services. I work out of our Grand Forks branch mainly and north from there. AgCountry's footprint expands from North Dakota, Minnesota into Wisconsin. We have a consultant up in Minot and one based out of the Fargo area, as well as Aaron. He is down in our southern Minnesota region, and I'll let Aaron introduce himself.
Aaron Sledden, succession and retirement consultant. I am in the southern half of Minnesota. I started here with AgCountry in this department just about a year ago. And then before that, I had approximately 20 years of ag lending with several different banks in the area. So thank you.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about how today's prices are going to impact your plan. So I tease Aaron that he came over to the good side from credit to help succession and retirement planning. That's the fun stuff. So this is what we do day in and day out. We help you make sure your estate plan is in order, succession and retirement, depending on if you have a successor, if you don't, the tax implications, all those things that we have to go through. Transition planning, entity planning, if we have an entity involved in the operation, making sure we're properly handling that, documenting things, buy-sell agreements, family meetings, the fun stuff, getting everyone to sit in a room and talk about things no one wants to talk about, and then other planning. There are different questions that we get every day that we have to find the answers to or work through just to almost be that sounding board for people. So we get to do that, and it's pretty fun. Just a note here, the importance of planning. If you're not planning for your future of the farm, there are a lot of farms out there who are. That makes them stronger. That makes them able to make quicker and wiser business decisions. And what happens when that's happening in your backyard? Big farms get bigger, small farms disappear. So we want to make sure that you are prepared with your planning so that you can make those wise choices as well. Today, the things we're going to cover is, first of all, updates, what we are seeing in the plans that we're talking to customers about today. What are a lot of things that we're seeing? A lot of that includes prices, where they're at, and Aaron will touch on that in just a minute. The importance of reviewing. So there is a legislation that's set to sunset. If you do nothing or Congress does nothing, which you decide whether they're good or bad at that, this will change the way that our plan is looked at. So we want to make sure we're reviewing our plans. We'll touch on estate planning, transition and retirement planning, and then communication and working with family. Aaron, go ahead.
So everybody can see this map here, see the prices. Obviously, land values have increased significantly over the last 4 to 5 years. And what we're looking at is, we always get asked the question, where are they moving? What is going to happen? And a lot of times what we tell people is that right now, the higher prices are still in line with the interest rates and the returns on the land. What's going to affect that, though, in the future is that you're going to have increased interest rates. You're going to have any type of increase on the crop inputs, and then also any type of lower commodity prices. So what we're advising people is that the land values are going to stay steady. They're going to increase for the next year or two. And it's going to take a couple of years for these three numbers to start reflecting in the land values. So we don't expect to see land values on an average to decrease at least for a couple more years looking at 2025. And even then, they may not decrease. It may just be a leveling off. We had just had a discussion with a gentleman here 30 seconds before we went on air that he had some land right around him over in Minnesota sell for just under $12,000, with the plan to move the operation or part of the operation also to North Dakota with a 1031 exchange. So we're seeing that. We're seeing guys from Iowa buy land in southern Minnesota. We're seeing southern Minnesota guys buy land in northern Minnesota and then into North Dakota. So at this point, we don't see the land values necessarily decreasing. We're going to keep seeing an increase for a while. Same rings true for equipment, especially the used equipment market. What we're looking at is that the increased rates have not necessarily affected the used market. What has affected it is that we now have new machinery that's become more available in the last 6 months to 12 months. We're also seeing an increase in maintenance costs. You throw the maintenance costs and increase in rates on top of the used equipment, we're now seeing where the new equipment is becoming more prevalent, easier access to it, being able to purchase that more. With that in mind and talking about the land and machinery increases, what we've got next for you is 2 case studies. And with these case studies, what we do when we sit down with a customer, we sit down at a boardroom, we sit across the table from them. And in this first case study, we've got a couple that are in their late 70s, pushing 80. We have their successor that is joining us, and he's in his mid-50s. And we have the grandchild successor joining us, and they're in their 20s. And so what we want to do is we want to sit down, make sure that all of the expectations are the same. And in this case, the successor is looking at 4 quarters of land at 75% of the appraised value for the purchase. They're looking at inheriting the farm site, they're looking at inheriting the home quarter, and the machinery is already being leased. What this leaves the siblings then is a 4-way split of the $800,000 and the proceeds from the land sale at 75%. So when we start talking about this, we bring up the land to mom and dad, to the successor. 4 quarters at 75% of $8,500 is just over $3 million. I'm sorry, just over $4 million. You take that out over 25 years at 6.5%, $328,000 a year. So when we have this discussion during this case study with these individuals, with these operators, the questions that come up are, do you want to be 78 years old as the successor and just paying off your land? What's fair versus equal for the siblings? Does this make sense for the successor and for the grandchild successor as far as their legacy for the farm? And will this operation be able to grow? So if we're putting $4 million into land that's already owned, do we have the ability to purchase the quarter or the 2 quarters that come up a year from now? Are we able to actually add more acres? The second case study that we have here talks about 9 quarters of land that's already within the family, and they farm approximately 300 acres. Successor is going to get 2 quarters of that land gifted to them. 7 quarters are to be purchased at 80% of the appraised value, and they have $2.5 million of equipment that'll also be sold to the successor at 80%. The siblings in this case are going to get the cash out from the land at the 80%, and they're also going to get the remainder of the estate that's not farm related. So once again, we go back and look at the land and the equipment. What does the buyout look like? Can the farm operate? So the total of the land and the equipment is $5.8 million for $487,000 in an annual payment. Once again, we go back to them and we sit down and we say, can this operation afford this? Can the operation grow in the future? That's the questions that we come up for them. Bobby, we've had to deal with these scenarios day over day.
Yeah.
What do we do?
That's a great question. So review. You need to review your plan with the prices where they are today. Those numbers weren't a surprise to anyone. We're not the experts there. You've heard it from everyone. Prices are increasing, so then actually putting numbers through your plan is going to help you understand, is this feasible or is this going to put our farm out of business, which is the total opposite of what I told you my ultimate goal was. So all wills and trusts should be reviewed every 3 to 5 years. That doesn't mean you have to make drastic changes, but with the prices of today, does it still make sense? What does that buyout look like for your farming child? We always think the farming child is getting the best deal, right? Maybe that's true sometimes, but sometimes it's like, well, they're on the hook for a lot of this if they want to keep their business going. So we want to make sure that we're reviewing your plan with your numbers and the assets that you have. If there's no successor, I'll give you a little more leeway, every 5 to 7 years, maybe taking that out and reviewing, because it's less of a business transfer as much as it is a asset distribution upon your passing. Buy-sell agreements, these get forgotten about a lot. So we get into an entity with someone, we have a buy-sell agreement with our cousin, and we've never looked at it again. Well, something happens, and all of a sudden we need to refer back to that document, and it's never been updated. There will be problems, especially with the buyouts. Let's say it's a buyout at 100%. Well, do I have the capital or do I have life insurance to buy that out right now? We need to make sure that's being reviewed. And I already alluded to this just in the beginning, the importance of reviewing based on estate tax. So we can review, we can get the assets, the business, where we want it to be, but we're also in a balancing act of managing estate tax limits. So right now, our estate tax limit on a federal standpoint is $12,920,000 per person. So just over $25 million for a couple. If Congress does nothing at the end of 2025, beginning in 2026, this reverts back to old law, which is $5 million indexed for inflation, which we would guess somewhere between $7 and $7.5 million per person. So we basically cut it in half, and as a couple, we have 15 million. We talked about the land prices. If that's all includable in our estate, or if we still have machinery that's increasing in value in our estate, we might end up owing some estate tax. On a federal level, over those limits, that's 40%. Again, are we doing what we need to do to make sure as much stays in our pocket and in our family and our business to continue? So we really have to balance what your goals are, and those are different for everybody. Some actions to take when we see some of these red flags, we'll say, is maybe we look at, do we increase discounts on the purchase of land? Is there less to be purchased? What else do we have up there? Sorry. Reduce the number of acres that need to be purchased. Make sure that the farming assets are going to the farming children, and maybe if we have other assets, we're getting those over here. Is it meant to be fair? Is it meant to be equal? We just need to dig down, and it's an emotional thing too. So sometimes it's a little self-reflection as, is your goal to be equal to all of my kids and leave them everything I can, or is my goal for this farm to continue that I've worked so hard for? So it's different for everyone, and no one's has the wrong answer. Entities with these high prices, just reviewing, maybe we need additional life insurance. If we expect a buyout, if someone were to die, maybe we need additional life insurance. Same thing, maybe reviewing this document every 3 to 5 years and coming up with an agreeable price between the parties so that we are using appropriate discounts, that this is a feasible buyout if someone becomes disabled or dies or gets divorced, making sure that that's all written into that agreement. And then actions to take at the sunset of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, that's the reduction in estate tax limits. Just make sure you're educated. Make sure you've prepared yourself to be ready to make changes if you need to. We obviously don't know when we're going to die and what the limits will be at that time, but we need to be prepared to be in the best situation when we can. So for that, a lot of individuals are looking towards triple LPs or limited liability, limited partnerships for land ownership. They work in a few ways. One is that it can help reduce the size of your estate because the entity is valued versus the land itself because it has some marketability and minority discounts. Additionally, if we're looking at maybe gifting a large portion prior to that sunset, it's easy to do in a triple LP versus having to find a lawyer that's busy with everyone else doing the same thing and making the deeds up to transfer land. So you can do it a little bit easier with the triple LP So that's something that a lot of people are looking at right now. Not for everybody, but I thought I'd mention it. I'm going to just go into the estate plan. So we've talked about how the changes are going to affect that plan, and we just want to make sure we're touching on the high-level things which should be included in your plan. When you come in, we need to understand, is the goal to transfer a business to a successor, or is it an asset transfer? I will tell you, hands down, an asset transfer is way easier. We can split everything up, get it to your kids if that's who you want it to go to, and move on. That business transfer is a little tricky. That emotion comes into play. As a mom, I couldn't treat one of my kids differently than the other. But if it's a business venture, you kind of have to. Then we need to make sure your assets are titled properly. So just by simply forgetting about certain things, beneficiary designations, joint tenants with rights of survivorship can change your whole plan. So we can have the best plan in place, but if we don't have the right titling on the assets, they might not ever hit that document and go to where they're supposed to go. Additionally, revocable living trust, kind of a hot topic. Everyone wants a revocable living trust. It's a cool thing at the coffee shop, right? We're going to avoid probate, but then we all forget to put the land into the revocable living trust or the assets, and you still go through the probate process to get it there. So you had this fancy thing, but you forgot to complete the process. So we want to make sure the assets are titled properly. We also want to make sure the plan is tested, especially when a younger producer is taking over. So if it were to happen today and we look at those buyout numbers, is that feasible? Or is it going to put them out of business? And then reviewing that, running that balance sheet, show us your assets. What does that look like? Are you comfortable with this? We want to run that through the plan. Within the plan itself, as farm families, we need to make sure there's a well-documented plan for the land. It's very specific. If you leave land equally to children, it can work, but we've seen more and more challenges with that. So if it's left to non-farming children, are there stipulations? Is there a buyout? Those things should be well-documented in the plan. The farm site, just think about losing where you do your business out of. That's not going to work very well. So how do we make sure that the farmer will be able to access or own or buy or whatever it is, that farm site? If I lost my office building, I would have trouble meeting with you guys, right? Same goes for farmers. So we want to make sure there's a well-documented plan for that. And then a plan for the machinery and equipment. If this has not been transferred during lifetime, what happens with this? Same thing, it's a business asset. If I lose all of my notebooks and my pens, seems silly, but how am I going to write down the stuff I'm talking to you about? Same with machinery. How are they going to keep their business going? Things that occur during lifetime, we need to also have that as part of your plan. So we've got the plan for when we die, but if we become disabled, we want to have a durable power of attorney, appoint someone to handle your financial affairs while you're living, if you're unable to do so, and then a healthcare directive. Appoint someone to handle your healthcare decisions in the event that you're unable to make them for yourself, and gives a little guidance to that person. I'm going to touch briefly on this. Sometimes we dig a little bit more in, but what's your plan for nursing home? That's also all intertwined with your plan. Do we have insurance? Are we planning to self-pay? Do we have the cash flow to support that? Does our family members know, what are we supposed to sell if you go into the nursing home? What's our approach here? Or are we going to look at protecting assets by transferring, maybe utilizing a life estate or an irrevocable trust as a couple of options? I'm going to hand it off to Aaron, but I will say I made a mistake. I forgot to mention we do have the handouts with the presentation. If anyone wants one, just raise your hand slightly and we'll have someone pass one out to you. Go ahead.
So we cannot stress enough how time is everything in this process, and how 5 to 10 years when you have a successor is minimal. It's always ideal to have as much time as possible to make changes, to make things appropriate, to make sure that it's set up the way that you want it, especially when you have a successor. When you have a situation where you do not have a successor, that 3 to 5 years is ideal for us. And we can, as a team, we can get something done in 6 months or a year. There's a reason though that there's boxes of tissue on our board meeting tables, is that's usually a pretty tax-heavy debt when you're talking about walking in June and saying you're done in December 31st. It's not an ideal situation, but we can get you through it. But please make sure you're leaving yourself enough time. Also, when you're planning out your retirement, make sure that everybody, as much as possible in your family, the successor, your children, grandchildren, are involved enough to know what's going on and to know what mom and dad's wishes are. Speaking of which, when we do sit down with mom and dad, a lot of the times, at least for me, only have been doing this for a year, I would always think that mom and dad were on the same page. That is not the case. A lot of times we sit down and...
Aren't you married?
I am married.
Are you always on the same page? Come on,
I just
Aaron.
agree with my wife and I go with it. She comes home, tells me what to do, and I'm good. So we want to make sure that initially mom and dad are on the same page. We make sure that they have the same idea, that they have the same retirement plans, because it does differ. The timing of it differs. Our boss, Russ, has a saying where you don't quit farming until you're 6 feet under. And a lot of guys, that's the way it is. And that's the way it's going to be. And as long as the rest of the family is aware of it, that works. But we need to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then we also, once again, the timeline. We need to make sure that if you're in your 50s, perfect. We've got 15, 20 years to get something figured out. It doesn't mean you should wait. It means that you should come in, get something set up, and then every 3 to 5 years we can tweak things, we can make it better for you. And when the laws change and when the taxes change, it gives us an opportunity to update it and move forward with something that you already have in place. And that way we're not looking back 15, 20 years and saying we should have done this a long time ago. With the transition, we have 3 key areas that we look at. We've got machinery and equipment, we've got the bins and buildings, and we've got the land. We're going to start with the machinery here. So one of the issues that we see a lot of is thinking that the successor should come in and just buy the equipment, buy the machinery. The issue with this is there's a huge tax trap with this. When you do an installment loan and you're retiring, taxes you're going to pay are going to be paid in the first year. Not a big deal if you're still farming and you still have income coming in from the farm, but this is a major issue when you are now retired and have no expenses to offset tax on that. So please make sure that when you look at moving machinery, that the installment loan is probably not the option to go with. A lot of times what we see is a piece by piece, which is basically moving one piece of equipment at a time to the successor. This can be done annually, this can be done when needed, but we do see this moving forward as the starting point for most successors to move into the operation. We do see that there is, the third option is gifting the equipment to your successor when you're looking at doing a trade. So in this case, you look at moving the equipment to the successor. They take that piece of equipment into the dealership, and the new piece of equipment that you bring home is now in the successor's name. We also look at gifting it and then also adding it to the rental income. So in this case, you gift a piece of equipment, the land rent is $200 an acre. Now the land rent goes to $210 an acre. It's a good way to get out of SE tax, which is self-employment tax, and it's a nice way to be able to transfer it. Next, we move on to the bins and buildings. A lot of this is the same as machinery based off of the depreciation. So you still have a lot of the same options, with leasing being one of them, where you would lease the buildings and bins to the successor. They would also be set up, it could be set up individually as a lease, or it could be set up also with the land rent as well. So now you've moved your land rent from $200 to $210 with the machinery. Now you're moving it from $200 to $210 to $225 with the bins and the buildings. One thing that you also want to look at is making sure that when you do this, that your estate plan is set up so that it doesn't contradict this. We don't want to have machinery, equipment, bins, and buildings doing one thing and your will and your trust saying to do another thing. We want to make sure that they match up. We want to make sure that they're updated. And one of the key factors with doing this update and review is making sure that the land underneath the bins and buildings is also being transferred correctly. A lot of times what we see is that you get the transfer or the lease of the bins in the building, but you forget about the quarter acre that's underneath it. And when the will or trust gives the quarter acre to siblings, now you created an issue that could have been handled ahead of time. Next is the transfer of the land. There's multiple options with this. If you don't have a successor, a lot of times what happens is that you just flat out sell the land. You don't have anybody else in the family that wants it or needs it, and so you end up selling it. And then we get into where we start looking at protecting the land from the nursing home, and a lot of that can come down to the land being owned in the trust, and it can stay in the trust for 5-10 years. The successor can rent it out of the trust, and then the trust moves it upon a certain time period. We also look at entity-owned. If you remember, Bobby had the discussion about the triple LPs. This is also known as a family partnership. A lot of these we get done for the simple fact that not only does it help protect from the nursing home, but it also deeds the properties over into the triple LP. And so upon your death, you're not having to move all the deeded property over to different individuals. All you're doing is moving a percentage of the triple LP to the individual. One of the other items we look at is a life estate. Life estate works really well in North Dakota, where we're at right now. In Minnesota, it is more of a hassle and a lot more work. Life estates, basically after 5 years, protect you from nursing home. In the state of Minnesota, it's a percentage of that. So approximately 35% is not protected, just to give you an average number. But the life estates, what they do is they guarantee the mom and dad income from the rent or income from a turbine, but it moves the property into the successor's name. And that way it's already moved, and so after the 5 years, the nursing home has issues or can have issues getting to the property. And then the last thing is to once again make sure that your estate plan, your wills, your trusts are set up to match the deeds on the property. We see a lot of issues come up where it's been deeded over or it's not deeded correctly, and now the estate plan has issues moving forward, and we need to get some things corrected. Looking at some planning tools, once again, we cannot reiterate how much time that you need moving forward. It's always good to have extra time. We look at setting the expectations. You know, does mom want to be in Arizona in the winter and dad not want to be? Or, you know, moving forward, what is the expectations? Is that something that can be move forward with in a couple of years, or is it something where we need to have more discussions and figure out where the successor is coming in and where mom and dad are at? The other thing is with the time is to make sure that we're controlling the taxes. Deferring grain over the last couple of years, great idea, but you need to make sure that you're getting coverage as far as not having the tax implications. And that's we're talking about having a defined benefit pension, a 401k comes into play. We won't go into details on the pension and that, but 401k has a limited dollar amount that you can give to every year. Pension does not. So you have a lot of different leeways with a pension, especially when you have more than 3 years to build that up for your retirement. Also, we look at charities and the charitable trust options. You know, if you have no successors, or if you have you know, a desire to give to certain charities, we can get that set up, and it can be set up for a long time. We can set, you know, trusts up for 91 years for the most part, so that you can have that moving forward for your legacy. And then lastly, for myself, we want to make sure that Farming is not easy to get out of. We want to make sure that you have the time. We want to make sure that moving forward you have the financial ability to retire. We want to make sure that in your last year and then first couple years within retirement, that the taxes are not going to restrict you or be a surprise when you get that bill. We want to make sure that it's limited to as much as possible. And then also, lastly, emotionally and mentally, we want to make sure that you're prepared to retire, that you've got it mentally in your brain that, you know what, we're going to just do the combining this year, and next year we're going to let the successor run with it. We're going to let the grandchild successor run with it, mentally preparing you for that retirement and moving you forward. Bobby?
I'm just going to tie back a little bit on the transition and retirement. We maybe missed, debt is going to slow that. So when we talk about these high prices and we want to go out and buy a bunch of land at these prices, does it make sense? Are you the right person writing the check? That is what producers that are prepared are ready to make that decision, right? So if I want to retire next year, but I can't because I need the cash flow from the farm to service this debt, is that the right move? Or have I already have this plan in my head where I know who should be making that investment? So that's something that's going to slow your plan if you have a bunch of debt nearing retirement. I took this from Aaron because I'm so weird and I just think it's so fun to watch people squirm and have to talk about things they don't want to talk about. So I'm like a sick person. Communication is going to be the single most important thing that makes all of this work or makes it blow up. Honestly, making sure that everyone understands your plan. They do not have to like it. They should understand it. They should know why maybe you're doing what you're doing. That will help them understand it. Is your shop or yard the Las Vegas? That's what our boss always says. Is it what happens in the shop stays in the shop? You better not go tell mom. That's probably not a good plan, huh? She's going to find out sooner or later. Good communication is what's going to keep things running smoothly, making sure the expectations are at least reasonable between everyone, and then the non-farming family. They might need to know the plan too. Again, they might not like it, but having them know the plan is hopefully going to cause less surprises and then hopefully minimize the risk of litigation down the road because, well, I already know. But mom and dad already told me that was going to happen, so it is what it is, and try to move on. Your family both needs to know your plan, and they want to know your plan. They want to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and this is true for all of the types of planning that we talked about today. And then lastly, actions speak louder than words. So what you do is often interpreted a lot louder than what you actually said. So the rules that never change, I already went over this, good communication. That is vital for your operation. Seems so simple, but it's for any relationship that you've had, business, marriage, this, family. Communication is going to be key. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Just because you told me it's going to happen, that likely will not happen if it's not in writing. So we want to make sure that whatever we've communicated, we've probably written down somewhere as well. Don't assume anything, especially the fact that someone understands what you're thinking. We are not mind readers. We don't know what you're thinking, so we're going to need to be told or communicated that. And then as far as your plan goes, there are cheaper, faster, better ways to do things, but you can't have all three. So decide if you want a good quality plan, invest in it. Make sure that you're reviewing it and taking the time because it's a more important part of your business than you probably realize. And then I think Aaron has reiterated this enough. Time is your friend. Give yourself time to do some of the things that you need to do to transition or get your estate plan in order. So we have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any, we would love to take some, or if anyone online has any, I don't know if you can send them in. Not sure. Any questions? Yep. The question is, when assets are put in a trust, does the trust get stepped up basis? As a general rule, so there are a lot of different types of trusts, but as a general rule, if you keep the rights to the income and the trust is includable in your taxable estate, then it does receive a step up in basis. If it's an irrevocable trust where you've given up the rights to the income for some reason because you don't want it includable in your estate, then typically no. But most of the ones that we see, if your estate is below the limit, you're wanting to keep the rights to the income, that's enough to make it includable in your estate and therefore receive the step up in basis. Does that answer your question? The follow-up question is, on a 5-year look back, does it have to be an irrevocable trust? Yes, if we're talking about protection from Medicaid or whatever, in order for that to be an unavailable asset to be considered, it needs to be an irrevocable transfer. In North Dakota, you can retain the rights to the income, and after 5 years, the asset itself is unavailable for consideration of Medicaid application, but the income is still available. So, and most people aren't ready to give up their income from the land anyways, so most of the time it's going to receive that step up. But yes, revocable trust won't do anything for you from an asset protection strategy. Did you have a question, sir? Yeah. Yes, so yes. The question is, can you give away assets during lifetime up to that $12 million that I talked about as the estate tax exemption? And yes, so there are two components of gifting. You can do an annual gift where you get an annual freebie where the IRS says, as long as it's under this amount, we don't really care. You can give that to as many people as you want. This year, that's $17,000. So if I want to walk around the room and give everyone $17,000, you'll come back next year, and I don't even have to tell the IRS about it, right? If you give above and beyond that $17,000 a year, like a $12 million, I'm ready to give everything away, you can use that $12 million exemption during your lifetime. You would just have none left when you die. Yep. Good question. Any other questions? Yep. The question is, what do you have to value land at? Can you give it to somebody at a lesser value? So I'm glad you brought that up because the IRS wants an appraised value, okay? So that's the value. If you give it away or you sell it for less, the difference between the appraised value and the sale price is a gift. And then you use up some of your either annual or lifetime exemption. Same goes if you die. We think our land, it should be worth $3,500. I'm never selling it. IRS doesn't care. The appraisal will tell the IRS what it's worth and whether or not you're hitting that estate tax limit. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. We'll stick around for a little while afterwards. Appreciate your attention today.
Thank you.